In 1485, Henry Tudor defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth and became King of England, completely against the odds. But as a usurper, Henry knew that he had a fight on his hands to keep his crown. In 1487, Henry saw off the uprising of Lambert Simnel with victory at the Battle of Stoke. But a more persistent problem would come in the unlikely form of a young man from Tournai. This young man is known to us as Perkin Warbeck. Warbeck claimed he was, in fact, Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the two princes in the Tower. Perkin was roughly the right age to be passed off as Richard, but he had to make his case convincing. For one thing, he had to learn and rapidly improve his English. Without that, he'd get nowhere. It was in Ireland that Warbeck's story began to develop, as Irish Yorkist supporters began to believe that Warbeck really was one of the sons of Edward IV, and that it could be he who reclaimed the crown of England for the House of York. This would be disconcerting news for Henry VII in England, as Ireland had been strongly supportive of the uprising of Lambert Simnel, providing him with men for an invading army, and Lambert had also been crowned in Dublin. However, not everybody in Ireland was convinced that supporting Perkin was the right course of action. Supporting Simnel's invasion had caused the Irish to lose thousands of its young men in the defeat at Stoke, and it seemed unwise to provoke the wrath of the King of England again. But Warbeck's claims did begin to pick up momentum, and word began to spread around Europe that one of the princes in the Tower was ready to claim the crown in England. From Ireland, Warbeck sailed for France, where he was greeted by King Charles VIII. The French, no doubt, were happy to, once again, create mischief for England. Henry, however, would not stand for this. He declared war on Charles and landed in Calais with a large army. Charles realised quickly enough that fighting a war over Warbeck was clearly not worth it, and he soon came to terms with Henry. Charles agreed to renounce his support of Warbeck and paid Henry a generous sum of money to leave France relatively unharmed, which Henry was glad to do. Now Warbeck turned to Margaret of York, Duchess of Burgundy. Margaret was the sister of Edward IV and Richard III, and therefore was the aunt of the princes in the Tower. With most of Margaret's immediate family dead, and with her having no children, it's possible Warbeck may have seen her as an opportunity to exploit any vulnerabilities she may have had. Accordingly, Margaret publicly recognised Warbeck as her nephew and added 30 gentlemen to his retinue, all dressed in typical Yorkist fashion. By 1493, Warbeck's story was becoming larger than life. In that year, he wrote to Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, the most powerful rulers in Europe, relaying his tale. Although they were unmoved, Warbeck still had another potential powerful ally, the Emperor Maximilian I. Maximilian had been left unimpressed by Henry's peace agreement with Charles VIII, and so invited Warbeck to his court, where he even attended the funeral of Maximilian's father. In England, King Henry grew steadily more irritable with this nuisance claimant who not only refused to go away, but was in fact making something of a name for himself across Europe. By 1495, the king's frustration was only growing, as men close to Henry, including his chamberlain, were found guilty of supporting the pretender. Some were imprisoned, others were executed. What had started out as a seemingly minor matter was now spiralling dangerously out of control for Henry, and now Warbeck was ready to make his move. With a small fleet, he sailed for England, where royalist supporters and bad weather combined to force Warbeck to sail once again for Ireland in search of reinforcements. In early 1496, Warbeck married a woman named Catherine Gordon, a match which had been arranged for him by another enemy of Henry, James IV of Scotland. James and Warbeck then launched an invasion of northern England, but James quickly retreated. Henry also came to an agreement with Emperor Maximilian as they formed an alliance against France. This, Henry hoped, deprived Warbeck of his most important potential ally. In August 1497, a peace agreement was also reached with James IV, and Warbeck finally appeared to be running out of options. Warbeck rolled the dice one final time. Landing in Cornwall, he was joined by 3,000 men, many of whom were said to be naked, and attacked Exeter. This failed, and Warbeck agreed to meet the king. Henry, a lenient man, showed his usual mercy to Warbeck and allowed him to stay at the royal court. However, after Warbeck had made a break for it, and once he had been recaptured, his treatment was less kind. Warbeck was placed in the stocks for public humiliation before he was thrown into the Tower of London. The following year of 1499, he was hanged after allegedly plots to free him were uncovered. People can make up their own minds if they believe Perkin's story or not. After all, his confessions were made under duress, although his final words on the scaffold appear to confirm he was indeed an impostor. But what can't be denied is that Perkin Warbeck led an incredible life.